My name is Tammy Sujarto, founder of Project Scale Up. I consult early stage companies, both startups and small businesses, turning ideas into viable and sustainable businesses. Today, our guest is the very talented Nola Mims, founder of ACT UP. Nola graduated summa cum laude. Is that right, Nola?
Yeah, yeah.
From the University of Pittsburgh with a degree in studio arts and psychology. Nola, can you please introduce the viewers to ACT UP and your vision in creating an inclusive space for Black queer artists?
Yeah, so basically, to try and make long and short of it, I came to Pittsburgh as an 18-year-old, very unaware of the world and still learning about myself. And in that process of 4 years being at Pitt, I really learned that there was a lack of support and resources for community well being for Black queer folks here in Pittsburgh. And that ultimately impacted my career as an artist and made it difficult for me to find inspiration, to find community, to find belonging. And so ACT UP was created as a space to help bridge that gap, not only for community, but also for the development of artists' careers. So being able to bring artists together to work on projects that they get to be in charge of and have autonomy over, and using that to not only support us financially, but also to bring community engagement.
Throughout our engagement, and we've been working together for a year or so, you've mentioned establishing like an artist collective of sorts. Can you explain for those of us who might not truly grasp what that means? What is a collective? How do you see what a collective entails in this sense?
Yeah, so I think for the purpose of those who may not be familiar, I won't even draw on like history of collective so much as what I see the collective being. It is a entity, most likely a community art studio space that artists get to share. They share the resources, they share any sort of machines and tools, and can even collaborate together on projects, find funding together, get grants together, things of that.
Okay. Do you think that there are enough safe spaces for Black queer artists? Or why do you think they're so hard to find? Or in your experience, they're hard to find in certain geographies?
Yeah, so even if you take off another marker of being an artist and just being a Black queer resident of Pittsburgh, I would say your best likelihood of finding other Black queer folks in mass, and that's a generous way of putting it, would be to go to a sort of nightlife event or bar or a nightclub. And for most people or for a lot of people, that's not accessible. And so with that being said, those spaces are also usually either owned by white and or straight people and are frequented by them, and we may get like one night of the week or one night of the month, but there is no dedicated Black queer owned spaces except for need-based organizations like Sisters PGH.
This sounds challenging. So, for an 18-year-old in a space where there's a very limited ecosystem, is what it sounds like. Very limited support, also being young, it sounds very challenging. But you went and did it anyway. What inspired you? What motivated you to do it anyway? To start your own company and go through this challenge?
Yeah, I mean, thinking about going from 6 years ago when I got to Pittsburgh as an 18-year-old to now, I think the struggle has been the motivation and the desire to seek a solution and having no avail, and ultimately realizing, okay, I have to make it if I can't find it. And so that sort of has been the inspiration, is if I can't have a space to thrive and to belong and to have community, then I'll make one.
What are your primary business goals for ACT UP in the next 12 months?
In the next 12 months, I'd like to see our first pilot program, Mims Ceramics, seek financial sustainability. So that means basically maintaining all of its own operation costs, and to be bringing in two new artists, hopefully come January of 2024.
Speaking of Mim Ceramics, this is you expressing your art in ceramic form. And I know you do art in many different formats, and this is your pilot, so to speak. What has been your approach for product development for Mim Ceramics?
I think for a lot of people, they think, well, why ceramic smokeware? And I think the best answer that I could give is, as a sculptor at heart and someone who feels like very connected to 3D forms, that felt like something that I could have a joy in making every day, or for hours or 50 hours a week, or whatever it, comes down to being. And on on the other hand of it, it's the business mind that I've gained being in the incubator for a year, understanding, what is in demand, what industries are on the rise, and what, trends or non trends are sort of here to stay. And that came about designing several different smokeware items that I felt like gave a small enough niche, but also gave variety that people could have collections. They could buy one piece, they could buy them all. It really was, I guess, a perfect marriage between the business insights or observations that I was making and my love for ceramics.
So I've seen you in your studio during production.
A
So,
mess.
and you would be covered in clay, and there would be just ceramic and dust everywhere. And I have seen you, just obsess over like, this isn't right, this mold isn't right, or there's going to be cracking here, I just know it, I have to figure this out. And these are just some of the challenges that you've encountered when it comes to Mim ceramics. So do you foresee any other challenges, or what are some of the biggest challenges that you faced in growing and scaling your business? And do you see any more challenges moving forward?
Yeah, I think it's a double question or a double answer in the sense.
Yeah.
On one hand, those are all of the reasons sort of why I am an artist, is because I like to overcome those challenges over and over again. In the studio, there's always a problem, and ultimately, you always find a solution or figure out a way forward. And it's funny because when it comes to art, I think I can get frustrated by a challenge, but nothing ever stops me. But business, being that this is going on now a full first year in business, those challenges, they're perplexing because I feel so green. And so I think that there's things that I can take from my groundedness that I feel in problem solving in the studio and bring that into the challenges I face with my business. But the things that I foresee moving forward would just be, one really big thing is Pennsylvania is not yet a recreational state, which means that I can operate in sort of a gray area. And I think that the easy idea would be to move somewhere where it is recreationally legal in order to be able to sell my product in the most abundance. But again, creative problem solving finds its way into my practice really whether I try or not. So I'm not too worried about that.
I have a curveball question for you. So, understandably, artists prefer to do their art, but over the course of the year, where you've been part of the Ascender Business Incubator, which I consult for, right? I've pushed you over the past year to think about the business side. So, we've practiced some critical thinking, and I pushed you harder and deeper to dive into the sustainability of the business, not just as an artist, but as a business owner. So along those lines, I thought that, okay, you did it anyway. You didn't decline to think along those lines. You faced it. So for other artists who might not be so inclined to think about the business side of being an artist, what advice would you have for them?
Yeah, I think initially getting into business, I'll be very honest, I felt really like icky just because I thought, okay, well, if my art is good, people should just buy it and that should be it. And that's what happens. And if my art is not good, or if people don't buy it, then my art is not good, which obviously caused other issues. But with that being said, as I started to learn more in the incubator about marketing and about customer discovery and all of these other things, I started to actually see, like I said, a lot of those creative problem solving opportunities pop up within business and ways that those skills that I have in the studio could be used in, I guess, the business industry. And so, what I would say to artists, I guess, is just because it's another industry doesn't mean that you don't get to bring the skills that you already have. And I think it's important to understand your intention and your goals. Like for me, I think something going throughout the whole incubator, it's, growth and what the trajectory of your business is so huge. But that looks very different for an artist when all you want is to live your life, to be able to afford your life, and maybe have some growth in there with your art practice being at the center. And growing a business and having that be your main focus, that doesn't allow for your studio practice to be at the center of your life. And so thinking about how you can take business goals that lead to sustainability, that lead to profit, and ultimately can lead to more free time so you can be in the studio. Those are things that are a perfect marriage between the goals of a business and the goals of an artist. And I think that those are things that can be attained regardless of what your preconceived ideas may be.
It takes an artist to message to other artists, I think. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, hopefully it gets across.
Yeah, as a business person advising artists, sometimes it doesn't go well. So thank you. um, do you think, in general, if you had to comment, do you think there are enough resources, funding, and support available for artists?
I think that there is a lot of money in theory in the art industry. I think somewhere between like 10 and 15 million last year, I think came into Pittsburgh art nonprofits or organizations, but how much of that money ends up in the pockets of artists at the end of the day, I would say is like minimal. And so I think that the resources are there, but the trickle down is like really slow.
There should be a report. Probably.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, there actually probably should
There
be a
is.
report.
Huh.
But then on top of that, there's also in writing grants, I've realized that the way that these grantors are set up is they get these large chunks of money and then they get to decide who gets it because the people who are funding can't be bothered to figure out where the money is going to go, so they pay other people to do it for them. And when I think about that, it makes me realize that's also why collectives are important, because we can be our own deciding entities. We know what we need the money for and we know what we want to see happen in our communities. And so having that money come directly to us from larger grantors would be a way better use of supporting artists and having those art funds go to actual art and creativity.
Do you feel that there's enough resources, funding, and support available for minorities, specifically for queer people?
I'm not like a sociologist or like public health, anything like that. I can't speak to the numbers and the data. There's research that says Pittsburgh is one of the worst cities in the US for Black women. We don't have data for Black queer folk, but I can tell you that there is definitely a shortage of community spaces. And in turn, I don't think people understand when you don't have a space to frequently run into and commune with people, it is a barrier to creation of friendships, the creation of relationships and community building. Because like if you think about how you met some of your best friends in your life, it probably came from work or from school or from whatever. If there are infrequent meetings of Black queer folks because we're in such a minority in this city, we have to have a common space to join, or we won't be able to find each other, or it will take forever, and no one has forever.
And we probably don't even track nor make a concerted effort to direct support and resources for neurodivergent people either.
No,
Probably,
no.
right?
And
Not that you've seen.
And I think that something that people don't realize is even as a neurodivergent person seeking resources, most resources are out there for folks who need like long-term assisted living, not
Yes.
necessarily folks who
Are
need,
functional.
well, I think functional is it's a divisive word. And I think
True.
also like because folks who need assisted living also are functional, but they need accommodations that unfortunately our society is not ready to give us. So with that being said, it's like I think that resources are absolutely lacking, especially again when it comes to being able to find like
Speaking of support and resources, I know you're trying to build a different kind of culture. Can you speak to the kind of culture you're trying to build and just how important this is to you and to your future team?
the type of culture that I want to build is really focusing on accessibility. And I think that that comes from my perspective of being a neurodivergent person, that accessibility comes in the form of, you know, every single space that you enter, from your home to the coffee shop you go to your job. And I've come to realize that when you think about accessibility, not only from a neurodivergent standpoint, but from being queer, trans, Black, there are not that many spaces in Pittsburgh that are accessible. We talked about before, there are events that can run in either white and or straight owned spaces, but that doesn't mean these spaces are friendly to us or accommodate to us. And so being able to build a culture in where folks can can operate in the minimal amount of labor, which I think that's another way to put accessibility is folks who live with a disability. It's not that we struggle to reach the expectations that society has set out for us. It's that we need accommodations because we have to work so much harder in order to achieve the same goals. And so by creating a space that is accessible in all of those ways, it allows for folks to show up as they are. And in that, I think you get the best results. You get people showing up to belong, to have community, and to create. And I think that's exactly what the culture is meant to do.
And then, how would you say you balance work and your personal life as a founder of an organization, especially when you're younger, right? And I've encountered younger people who may not have yet the buffer that you need because you haven't saved up a decade's worth of savings. You don't have that house yet, or whatever it is, that you don't have the accumulations yet that an older person might have. And there's some insecurity in that. And so, how do you balance all of that?
Yeah, I think at first I balanced it by letting fear stop me for 2 years or making me wait. And then the pandemic happened, and the idea, like many people, realized time is not forever. And you can wait until you're a big kid to go after your dreams, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee success. Like you said, a savings might offer you some protection, but at the end of the day, waiting wasn't going to do anything for me. And so I think that ultimately I tried to make really conscious decisions and I tried to follow my intuition. So the beginning came from a really large opportunity that was presented to me. And I saw that as a low risk and high reward decision. And that started things off. I say that because I think it's important to demonstrate the fact that although I have not put any of my own personal funds into the business, how things started were definitely very fortunate. And I held on to that money for dear life once that check came in and really thought deeply about what the decisions I was going to make going forward. And at that point, I had at least like 6 or so months under my belt in the incubator. So I felt equipped to make competent business decisions that were going to help my business move forward. And so I would say, I guess, advice or sort of how I've navigated that has just been to take your time because there's always ideas, there's always impulses, but a lot of times can't unspend once you spend. Once you sign a lease or once you purchase an asset, that's it. And so if there's a way to do it for cheap, to find it borrowed, to find it, used, whatever it may be, or to do it yourself, those are the ways, honestly, that I've saved the most money and allowed myself to go further in the long run.
Is that kind of the advice that you would give to aspiring entrepreneurs or artists who are trying to get in a similar field as you are?
I'm glad that you add that caveat. I was like, I can't give any advice to entrepreneurs that are not artists because I have no idea. But to folks trying to get into a similar industry, I would say really pay attention to the needs that you have in your life because it's likely that you're not the only one, especially if you exist in any marginalized group. Unfortunately, those of us who are very marginalized, but even in those communities hold a lot of privilege amongst that community, we have to be the ones to advocate and build for those who cannot. And so pay attention to what your community needs and use that as a point to inspire the change you want to make.
That's powerful.
Thank you.
It's very powerful. I can't believe you're only 20 something. This is why we like you. You- you're you're smart for your age for sure.
Thank you.
Shameless plug. I always ask entrepreneurs to do this. Never be ashamed to market and sell yourself or your business. What do you need right now from those who might be watching? How can the audience or the viewers support you and your business?
Yeah, so right now we're looking to raise 40,000 by the end of the year to help move into our 2 new pilot projects with 2 new artists come January. So hopefully that will come in the form of grants, but if folks are willing to support through crowdfunding, that would greatly be appreciated as well. And you can reach out either through Instagram or on our website. And so, yeah, looking to raise funds and also looking to begin workshops this summer. So if you're looking to get into a ceramics class, please find us on Instagram and sign up. And follow on Instagram is more than great. And you can check out our website for some ceramics. You can find us at mimsceramics.co and then actup.one. And they both have their own respective e commerce sites with artist made merchandising. And you can sign up for workshops on mimsceramics.co.
And then, are there any organizations or individuals that have supported you that you'd like to give a shout out to before we close?
Yeah, probably too many to name, but obviously Ascender has been a huge, huge, huge help in giving me all of the business knowledge and skills that I've gained over the past year. And also the person that encouraged me to even join the incubator in the first place, Jenny. And yeah, I think also just an organization that I want to shout out in terms of like who has helped me as an artist through the struggles that I had mentioned about, which is OPA, the Office of Public Arts, and specifically Divya at the Office of Public Arts has been a godsend. So thank you to Divya and to OPA.
Well, I want to thank you for sharing your story. I think stories like yours, especially when it's underrepresented, and that's an understatement, is important for us to hear, for everybody to hear, because one, it's underrepresented, and two, it's a different kind of story. It doesn't get heard a lot. And so the story and the struggles and the challenges that you go through feels a lot different than most stories.
Yeah,
That journey looks entirely different. When we're not familiar with those kinds of stories, it's easy to almost turn a blind eye because it's unrelatable to most of us.
yeah,
So I want to make sure that your story is heard. So thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your story. I'm confident that it will inspire somebody. So
yeah. And
thank
thank you for your time.
thank you, Nola.